Well, I know you have
Yeah,
like you're starting the day, so like we can get started.
yeah.
I'm Gretchen, and I'm hosting a series called In Her Image, which is a series of conversations for part of my residency with Gazzelli Art House, which is based out of London. And the thesis behind these conversations is that women, when they're just being themselves and exploring what is interesting to them, it's almost inherently feminist because they're solving problems for themselves, they're approaching the world without trying to fit into an existing mold. And so I've gathered an amazing group of women whose work I admire, who I think are passionately involved. It started as like an art tech, and it's really expanded to be including athletes. I just talked to a boxer, and this is my friend Lauren. And Lauren is in technology at Bloomberg and is also starting a business, which I think is really um, not just interesting that you are starting one, but I'm really excited for you to share with everybody what your new business is and the story behind why it is you're essentially doing two jobs right now because you're that interested in this. So why don't you tell a little bit about your background and your story, and then also tell us what you're working on.
Sure. And I'm so happy to be here. So thank you for the invitation. My name is Lauren Suen, and as Gretchen mentioned, I've historically been in technology for most of my career. But I think for a long time, I've been looking for a way to give back in a little bit more of a personal way to the community and to the world, really. And so Spare started as it started as like a very personal, trying to solve a very personal problem. And after doing a little bit more research, I sort of realized that this is something that happens to a lot of women. And I thought this would be such a great way to address a problem that a lot of people have in a really meaningful and thoughtful way. So that's how Spare is the company name, how that came along.
And tell us, what is Spare?
So the idea started, I had just started a new job in Japan. So I was a little bit stressed. I was a little bit nervous about the job, starting a job in a new country. And part of what happens when
And
a woman
previous
is
to Japan,
stressed,
you'd been in San Francisco and Hong Kong, but
correct.
mostly like you grew up in San Francisco, worked mainly in the Bay Area. Like,
Yes, exactly. I've always wanted to live abroad and work abroad and get that experience. So finally, this was part of my dream. I was doing it, but I think I was really stressed as part of that. And I'm the type of person, if I'm really stressed, I don't really show it emotionally, but my body will show it. And part of what happens to women when they're stressed is sometimes their menstrual cycle can get out of sync. So what happened was my period showed up 2 weeks earlier than I had planned, and I was completely unprepared. I was scheduled to be at my job for the first time, and it was an all-day experience. I didn't have time to go home and change and get comfortable, and I had no supplies with me. And I just thought to myself, it's crazy that there isn't a better solution for these types of problems, because this is not the first time it had happened to me. So um, I started thinking like, well, maybe there is a solution. And as I started to do more research, there really wasn't. There are solutions like um, leak-proof underwear, which is more preventative. And so you basically put the underwear on before you know you're going to have your period, or before you know you're going to have light bladder leakage. But it's really, you have to plan ahead to know that you're going to have an accident like that, and to put those on, premeditated, and put those on ahead of time. So this is really looking to address a post-leak problem, whether it's a period or light bladder leakage, incontinence. This is looking to address that issue. So basically what Spare is,
I also
yeah,
want to stop here now because I know that you've done a lot of research to find out that the women, the amount of women that are impacted by these problems is much higher. It's like it's not something that people generally like to talk about. It's not something
Right.
that advertising likes to deal with necessarily, and it's certainly not something that most men like to hear about. So, but
Right.
research has shown that this like these sort of issues, whether they're of the ones
Yeah.
are actually way more common than maybe previous.
Yeah. And it's a really interesting time because more research is starting to come out now that this conversation is becoming more normalized. But Forbes has done an article that stated 25 to 45% women experience a form of leak. So that when I saw that statistic, I was sort of blown away. That's 1 in 3 women are experiencing something that they feel too embarrassed to talk about. Historically, you're right, no one has enjoyed talking about this type of topic because it can be embarrassing. And admittedly, when this first happened to me, I kept it to myself. I didn't share it with my immediate circle of friends until I started to do more research and saw actually this is something that is pretty normal. It happens to a lot of people, women of all ages, whether you're waiting for your period for the first time when you're 10 or 11, and when you're 60 and your muscles aren't as strong, and so you experience light bladder leakage when you cough or sneeze or laugh, and these are very typical things that happen on a regular basis. So it's sort of fascinating the amount of research that's coming out. I wish more existed, but that's sort of what keeps this interesting, is helping to shape that.
And again, I want to continue on with your story, but there's some interesting points coming up here. And one is that the historical focus for research that do deal with issues that impact women really historically have to be thought of and led by women. And even on the consumer end, a lot of times research occurs because product development is going to sponsor it or potentially going to
Right.
sponsor it. So it's interesting to have you at the point of this in this problem chain where you are also looking back and realizing that there really haven't been the women in whether it's scientific leadership or research leadership or grant leadership to have addressed this historically.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's a great time to sort of be in the femtech space. There are increasingly more programs that are aimed at targeting female issues. So you're seeing companies like Cora that are, targeting the tampon industry and finding ways to make it more sustainable, more organic, so that things we're putting into our bodies are not, chemically based. And so it's really interesting. I'm excited to be a part of this space. I have to admit, I grew up as a female athlete, so I don't know if you have similar experiences, but I was always sort of told to don't use the women's golf clubs, don't use like the women's clothing, wear like the men's, because that makes you more tough, that makes you more a better athlete in a lot of ways. And so for me, a lot of these, very female issues weren't talked about at all, because in a way it was almost like it would make us look weak if we sort of addressed, oh, I have cramps today, so that's why I played poorly. That was sort of unheard of. And so I'm this whole space is very new to me, but it's fascinating for me to sort of go through my own journey and learn more about it.
Well, I suppose even like you are a really fabulous golfer, and the when products were made for women historically, they were like pink it and shrink it. They weren't
Yeah.
necessarily made to actually address women's issues, so it was seen as
Yeah.
almost like a marketing ploy without addressing real problem.
Yeah, exactly. It was always, what makes it prettier, what makes it easier to sort of use. So even today, women's clubs it's a much weaker type of shaft, and it's a little bit easier for women to hit because historically women haven't been as strong, or that's the notion. So hopefully, this sort of helps change other industries too, and it'll be exciting to see more and more women sort of getting stronger and changing it.
So let's get back to your product. You found your problem. You've been doing the research, and
Yeah, so essentially what it is, um, it's individually packaged women's underwear. So it's a really comfortable, seamless fabric that's feels like you're not wearing anything at all. It's super comfortable, but each pair is individually packaged in a pretty small plastic pouch so that it's easy for you to slip into your purse and carry it, or in your bag whenever you might need it if you experience an accident or a leak. So each box will include 3 pairs. I think that's a good start. And as you sort of use each one, it's so comfortable and reusable that it can go into your normal rotation of underwear. So the idea is once you have this package in your purse, if you have a leak or you get your period early, you could use the new pair of spare underwear, but the pouch is resealable so that you can put your old pair in and you don't have to wrap it in tissue or throw it away, which is the worst outcome. So it's really in your purse for peace of mind, and that's our tagline.
That's nice. And
Yeah.
as you've been developing this and talking about it, um, how have you found that um, when you're not talking to women, of course, like you have partners and investors and photographers and a lot of people you deal with that maybe don't have a personal experience of this problem. What has allowed you to become as comfortable as you are with sharing and talking about it and kind of overcoming that stigma?
It was hard in the beginning, I have to admit, but it's getting easier because I am so passionate about this problem now. And I do think by me having the conversation with someone, with a friend or a stranger, anyone, maybe that will give them the courage to have that same conversation. It's sort of a trickle effect. Um, I think as I was doing, having these conversations with friends and other people, I was partly doing it for research because I was curious, what happens when you're out all day and you experience something like this? And the answer sort of varied, but the predominant answer was that they would just go commando and they would have to throw their old pair away. And I thought, well, that's not a great solution, especially if you're, self-conscious or, there are a lot of bodily fluids involved. And so how do you, um, it's just crazy that something doesn't exist. So it's been really interesting to sort of start that conversation. They're always curious, what made you think of this? Because it's sort of an out there idea. But the more you sort of go down that conversation, you realize that a lot of other people could benefit from this. And it makes the conversation really interesting, just hearing their personal experiences and, hearing them say, wow, I could really use something like this is what makes me really happy. So
I'm also really interested. We were talking a little bit the other day. I had just watched the masterclass on Sarah Buckley from Spanx, and was really. She was the first self-made female billionaire ever. She still owns 100% of the company, and when I had already developed this conversation series, but when I watched her and her example, her is a very similar story in that she was essentially remaking women's undergarments, but actually asking, like, does this feel okay on your body? Which seems like such an obvious question, but because like you're saying about tampons, like, oh, like, should this thing that I put into a highly absorbent area of my body have toxic chemicals on it? Seems like an obvious no, but here we are, 2020. And so, like, when I was watching her story, I very much sincerely felt her to be a sort of activist. And I know you're very passionate. I think when you hear of a company that, oh, they care about social good and this and that, often feels insincere. But when you know the people individually, I know you do a lot of Habitat for Humanity and you care a lot about the environment. As you were in product development, you thought about disposable, not disposable, how do you solve this problem in a way that also very much embraces other things you care about, how it's manufactured, where it's manufactured. And so I'm wondering about how you feel about, I mean, you're starting a business, you're out there to solve a problem and to make money, but how do you feel about the way that you're sewing in your personal beliefs and activism into your company?
Yeah, it's, when we were sort of looking at the different um, packaging and items we need to actually create the product that we envisioned, we were reaching out to a lot of factories, what do you have that's sustainable? What do you have that's biodegradable? And it's also crazy that, more options don't exist. So it took us a really long time to find the right production partners to create something that's, sustainable in a way that we, are hoping for. So we're super happy and lucky that we found great partners and great products that we can feel really good about putting into the world, and knowing that it's not going to necessarily make it a worse place from an environmental standpoint. And part of what, I really envision someday, I would love to start out this way when we launch, but we're trying to figure out the best way to do that, is figuring out a way to give back to less fortunate communities. So one of my first ideas was maybe, a percentage of profits can go towards building a birth clinic in a less fortunate community, because it's still a really high percentage of maternal fatalities in countries with not a lot of resources. So, this, I also see this as helping the maternal population, because women who are pregnant experience light bladder leakage on a higher frequency. So I thought, that would be a great way to sort of pair this product with a very important problem that we're seeing still in 2020, is really high maternal fatalities, and women who could really benefit from something like this, just having something comfortable to put on after going through something traumatic or through something painful, just having something a little bit more comforting for them right after.
Yeah, and this is exactly why I thought you were so perfect for this conversation series, because again, it's solving a problem, it's a business idea, it's a product that has been developed, but because of the approach to problem solving having to do with being a woman and the female body, it really comes from this place that it only could have existed from either a ton of care and research or a community of women and people. And so I'm really, really excited for you and for Spare. What's the timeline? Like, when can people get them? Where can they get them? What can we put?
Yeah, so we're hoping to launch in the next probably 2 months, maybe mid to end of June. We're now moving into production for the boxes and the plastic pouches, which are recyclable and biodegradable, which we're excited about. So we are getting really close to the finish line. We're pretty soon you'll start to see marketing campaigns from us. Our website will probably be up and ready in a few weeks. And we're just really getting excited to launch and see how people react to it and what the feedback is. It's been interesting going down the more emotional side, and hearing stories like women who oftentimes will cancel plans or will choose to stay home because they actually have this problem, and they don't want to be in a situation like they're in a movie theater where they can't run to the bathroom when they need to because they have to sit there for 2 hours. So I'm really hopeful that this will sort of go and help these women who feel embarrassed about this conversation, this topic, and maybe feel worried and stressed when they are out in public because they're worried they're going to have this problem. So we're getting really excited.